Today we'll be doing an exercise in problem set 1 from CS50. We're going to be handling the Mario More project. We're going to go line by line and explain my solution to this problem. Stay tuned.
You're a phony!
So we're going to start off by looking at the requirements. So since we're handling the Mario More PSET, we're going to be printing these blocks. So it's going to be two pyramids aligned to the middle, made of hash blocks. So it's going to be one line asking the height. We're going to input the height, and then it's going to be however many, like if they put in an 8, it's going to be 8 rows tall. And it's going to, it's going to do the same thing for 4, except 4. Same thing for 2, so on. And apparently they only want us to include the numbers between 1 and 8, including 1 and 8. And notice there's a gap between the pyramids, so we're going to have to print that too. When we test the code, it's going to have to kick out negative numbers, 0, anything that's not between 1 and 8, including letters, or if they don't input anything at all, it's going to have to repeat and re-ask us the question. So we're going to go over some pseudocode. This is the steps I usually take to get to the code. So for the requirements, we're going to need to test for the correct input. That's going to be the first thing. Second, we're going to have to print 2 symmetrical pyramids based on input with a gap in the middle. The includes that we're going to have to include, which is the code that we're going to have to bring in from the outside of the code, our own code. It's going to be CS50.h, which is CS50's library, and then standard io.h, which is, I guess, the standard library for C. And from here, we're going to break down those first 2 problems into as many as we can. So I see 3 main problems. So basically, the first one is going to remain the same, testing for input. We're going to ask the user for an input, which is validated, which I guess could be a separate one, but I'm going to combine those into one function. Then we're going to have to print each row for the full height of the pyramid. So since, for example, if we have 8 rows, we're going to have to print each row individually, and then we're going to have to print the correct amount of blocks on each row. So I think that's a step in itself, printing the row out, and then also printing the individual rows are separate problems, in my imagination. So let's go to a new file, and I'm going to code this line by line. I'm going to be looking to the left because I pre-made this to make sure it works. So first, we're going to bring in libraries. To do this, we're going to have to hashtag include them, and so that's CS50.h and standard io.h. And then I like to try to play around with my prototypes first. So function prototypes. This allows you to kind of declare the functions ahead of time so that you know what is in your program without actually cluttering the top of the program up with the actual functions. That way you can just go straight to the main, and it increases readability. So we're going to go with ask height first. So this is going to ask the user for their height. And what is it going to take? Is it going to take any arguments? No, I don't think so, because it's just going to ask the user for something. So that's a function within it. So we're going to, and that doesn't require us to feed it anything. Then it's going to return an integer because the height is a number. And then after that, so that's going to be the prototype for the ask height. Next, we're going to do print row, because I think we have to focus on the rows first, like go from the big to the small. So we're going to do the row, and that's not going to return anything because that's just going to print. And we're going to name it print row. And that's going to take the height, I think, because it's just determining how many rows to print, and it's going to print them based on the height number. And then within the print row, we're going to have print block, which is also just printing. So it's not going to return anything. So I'm just going to do void. And for this, we're going to need to know what. To print the blocks within the row, we're going to need to know the length of the row. So let's do int row length. That's going to be a number that shows us the length of the row. And then we're going to have to tell it which row we're on so that it knows how many blocks to print. So we're going to do int row number. So these are things we're going to have to feed it for print block to work. So now I'm going to talk about the main function that delegates the work to other functions. But I'm just going to declare it here so we can go back to it later. So our first function is going to be ask height. So ask height is going to ask the user, asks the user for the height. It's going to repeat until the user gives us what we want, which is positive integer between 1 and 8, including 1 and 8. So here we're going to retype out the prototype. So this is going to be the header for the function. So we're going to do the brackets thing, close the function. So what are we going to need for ask height? I usually like to declare my variables first. And so obviously we're going to have a height variable to store the height whenever we ask the user. So it's going to be int height. It's going to store user input. And then we're going to have to, check that for validity, you know what I mean? So I like to use Boolean here. And I'm going to set a variable to incorrect input. And it's going to be true for now because right now we have no input, so it's going to be true. The input is incorrect. And since we have to keep asking the user for input, we're going to, before we actually ask them for the input, we're going to open up a while loop. That's just what I want to use. You can use anything you want. And we're going to set the condition to as long as incorrect input is true, which means the input is incorrect. It'll keep running as long as input is incorrect. So here we're actually going to call the function that asks for user input. We're going to pull a function from CS50's library called getInt. It is going to take an integer. First it's going to print out this question. It's going to ask them for a height. And it's going to store it in the height variable that we declared earlier. Okay, so now that we've gotten the height, it's going to take the height from the user, well, the number that supposedly the number that the user gives us, and then we have to check it. So if the height is greater than 0, but also the height has to be less than 9. Like, these operators don't include the number that we actually compare it to. So it's going to give the set between 1 and 8, including 1 and 8. But if this is true, it'll set the incorrect input boolean to false. It's telling the while loop that the input is no longer incorrect, so it can break out of it. So it's going to repeat until it sets incorrect input to false, which means that the height is correct. But then also we have to remember, like we feel done here, but we have to always remember to return what we promise. So here we say we're going to return an integer, so we have to actually do that. Return height. Height is an integer, so that'll do for that. Next, we're going to move on to, I'm going to do print block first, because whenever I'm planning, I like to do big to small. but whenever I'm actually doing the work, like programming, I like to start from the small and then work my way up to the big. So actually cut that part, and I'm going to, so next I'm going to do print row. Here we print a row. We take in an argument height to tell print row how many total rows to print. So like I said earlier, it's going to return nothing, so it's a void. I'm going to print row int height. We're feeding it the integer of height. So row count is going to be the first variable that we declare. It keeps track of which row we're focusing on. So we're going to do int row count, start at 0 because we're going to start the first one. And then how do we keep doing this for the entire height? So again, I'm going to use a while loop. This loop it's going to call print block over and over until the rows are all printed. And while row count is less than height, because it starts at 0, so we're not going to include height. So here we're actually going to call print block, which we're going to create right after this. We're going to give it the height, because we said earlier, well, let's decide this later. Let's put that in later, because we don't know now for sure what these numbers are going to be. But we do know we're going to shift the row count. So it's going to shift the focus to next row. And here we return nothing. We promised it nothing, so we return nothing. It's just going to be printing. It's actually going to be just calling this function. But like we said earlier, we're going to have void print block. This print block is going to actually be printing, and we're not returning anything. And it takes two integers. It's going to take row length, and it's going to take what else? Row number. So we can go back to this function up here, and we're going to feed it row length and row number. So what would row length be? Row length would probably be the height, right? Because that would tell us how long the rows would be, including the empty blocks. So whenever we're printing these rows, we're actually printing the entire entire row, but we just have to differentiate between empty blocks, which are spaces, and hash blocks, which are hashtags. So the total length of that would be the height. And then we have to feed it the row number, which is which row we're focusing on, which would probably be row count. So let's go back to print block now that we have that set up. First, we're going to need to figure out what variables we need. So I'm going to set the focus first, see which block we're focusing on. So which block I'm focusing on. I'm going to name it block count. It's going to count which block we're on. And like I said earlier, we're going to have empty blocks, we're going to have full blocks. So let's just make empty blocks. We don't know yet, and full blocks. So let's think about this for a second. To get the number of spaces, we're going to need to find out how many blocks we're printing. So to know how many blocks we're printing, we're going to have to use the row number, because row number is going to tell us how many blocks are needed in each pyramid. Let's say we're focused on row 2, we're only printing 2 blocks per pyramid. So to figure out the empty blocks, it's just the inverse. So we're going to subtract row number from row length. So subtracting row number from row length. And then we're going to have to subtract 1 from that, because we're starting at 0 with block count. Then full blocks is just the inverse of that, which is row length minus empty blocks. So from this, we figured out the number of empty blocks, number of full blocks, but this doesn't seem to solve the other side of the pyramid. This solves one side of the pyramid. To do the other side, we need to figure out how long the full row is, because I don't want to print space on the other side. I'm just going to stop once I finish the blocks, the hashtags. So we're going to do another int for int full row length. So for this one, it's just going to be row length plus full blocks, because we're just repeating the same process on the other side. We don't need a plus 1 here. We're just going to do that. So to reiterate, empty blocks is the number of empty blocks we're printing, the spaces. Full blocks is the number of actual hashtags we're printing. And then full row length is the combined length of both pyramids. So to keep doing this for the whole row, we have to do a loop. So I love while loops, so we're going to do a while loop here. And we're going to do as long as block count is less than full row length. Because even though there's a gap in the middle, I'm just going to add that to a print statement. A print statement is, and it's really not going to be any different from printing a regular block, because I'm just going to add on a space to a normal block and have a condition for that. So let's make that the first condition. So if the block count is equal to the row length minus 1, since we start at 0, we're going to print f, like I said, and we're gonna print a hashtag. But because this is right after the first pyramid, this is checking for the condition if we're focusing on the block right before the gap. Because if we're at row length minus 1, that means we're at the end of the first pyramid. So like, let's say we're at 2, right? And right now our block count is at 2. We're going to have to print the little gap. So very important. Right after this, we're going to have to shift the focus to the next block, the block count plus plus. That's going to add 1 to the block count. After this, we're going to check for another condition. Else if only checks for this condition if the first one was not met. So after that, we're going to add the condition, which is block count equal to, let's do full row length this time, and subtract 1 from it. So what this is going to check for is if we've actually reached the end of the second pyramid, and this way we don't have to. We're going to go down to the next line basically, because after this it's going to break the loop anyway. Because if we're at row length minus 1, that means the next one is going to be equal to row length, and it's not going to continue the while loop. So you're going to print f, and we're going to have the hashtag and the new line. And again, very important, we have to shift the block count to the next one. Okay, I have too many braces. Okay. So after that, we're going to check for another condition, because now we need to check to see if we're printing an empty block or a full block. So if our empty block number is greater than the block count, that means we're still printing, because we're starting off printing empty blocks. So as long as the empty block count is greater than block count, that means we're still focusing on an empty block. So here we're just going to print a space. And of course we have to shift the block count by 1. And this again only executes if the other two fail. And for the last condition, we're not going to have to set a condition. We're just going to say this is the default thing. If the other ones don't work, we're going to print hashtag. And then again, shift the count. So this is going to run until our while loop breaks at the end of the full row length. So now that we have this function written out, we know what to do for the main function. We have all three of our functions that we talked about written out. So we're going to go into the main function and we're going to start calling it. It's calling the functions. So first things first, we have to ask for the height and width to get the height from the user. So once ask height gives us our height, let's say 8, what do we do with that number? We have to feed it to print row. So we're going to put ask height within print row, because ask height really is just the 8. So then once we feed print row the 8, it does the rest of the work and feeds print block the numbers that it has, and then it really does all the work there. So let's see if this works. To do this, I'm going to copy this and put it in I'm going to paste it in here. So this is what we just wrote. Let's test it out. Make mario.c 8. Alright, looks good. I'm going to check 50.
Thanks for watching through or skipping to this point in the video. If you like my content, like or subscribe, and I would appreciate it very much. Thanks.